if there's a torque.
We deal daily with the magic trick of calculations over measurements. So when I saw it, I'm like, oh, here we go. A bit of a swindle from a ski scientist. It doesn't mean I don't believe her story, I do. It just means that the evidence I saw is being presented in a way that supported her story, and that's what you pay for with good lawyers, right? Something that's going to razzle-dazzle the jury.
The thing to know with Newton's laws,
the laws of motion of Newton were not right, end quote. Richard Feynman. I'm a Paltrow fan, and I got timed out for it. Told to stop spamming and things of that nature. When I'm pointing out, this is on a channel called Legal Bytes. So I actually like the channel host, and I said to her in the chat while this was going on, you know, because there's a bit of a kerfuffle about this, because I'm essentially disagreeing. When someone challenges the basis of the evidence being presented, which is me, saying I don't agree with this because he hasn't got any measurements, that's my main overriding point. And then when people start talking about how valid Newton's are in his calculations, I'm like, oh, Newton's not even right. And then I start getting asked for citations. Anyway, the point is that for that, I got kicked out of the chat. But actually, check her out. She's very good at Legal Bytes herself. This is one of her overzealous mods in this regard.
If there's a torque on the ski, a twisting torque.
What about Mr. Ramon's version?
For Mr. Ramon's version, I couldn't get it to work. It doesn't match with the laws of physics. So the thing to know with Newton's laws, force equals mass times acceleration, if you have some, and I'm going to draw two versions of a skier, and I'm not the best Pictionary player. I'm going to be a twisting torque.
What conclusions do you draw?
Sure. The first is that Miss Paltrow's version of events is consistent with the laws of physics and how people move and rotate.
Okay. This is from Richard Feynman. Quote, the discovery of quantum mechanics first, and then in the behaviour of light, and then in the behaviour of matter, finally culminating in 1926 with a full equation of quantum mechanics, which told us that the laws of motion of Newton were not right and had to be modified with other laws which are quantum laws of motion. End quote. Richard Feynman, Nobel laureate physics.
I pulled up the Principia one where he mentions gravity. So in Principia, Newton describes gravity as an ever-present force, a tug that all objects exert on nearby objects. The more mass of an object has, the stronger its tug. Increasing the distance between two objects weakens the attraction. That's his description, his theoretical description. But I think just point out here as well, the truth is Newton could only describe gravity, but he didn't know how it worked. In his own words, gravity must be caused by an agent acting constantly according to certain laws, he admitted. But whether this agent be material or immaterial, I have left to the consideration of my readers. And I'll point out that it's 300 years that sits there before anybody does anything with it. It was so profound and useful, actually, of proving gravity itself that nobody does anything with it. They just let it sit there. It's not until we get down the line that we start to invent the forces. But at this point, it's just something that could be, but it's not attributed to anything. And Newton, from my understanding, makes great strides to distinguish what he observes and what he can prove and demonstrate.
So yesterday I got put in a timeout on one of the channels that I watch as a bit of escapism from Flat Earth. So before the Gwyneth Paltrow trial that's currently taking place, it was the Johnny Depp trial. Again, just a bit of escapism. Celebrities and their first world problems. Anyway, in this instance, I'll just clarify this. I'm on Paltrow's side. She's being shook down by a guy who smacked into her, as far as I can ascertain from the evidence that's been laid down so far. But no one actually saw it happen. They saw just before, just after, there was people right around, they were there immediately, but no one actually saw the impact itself, right? Now, based on that, this guy's shaking her down for 3 million and then reduced it to 300,000. And part of the issue is that he's got cracked ribs. Interesting to me, I've just had cracked ribs. So I'm interested from that perspective. Now, they bring in an expert, Paltrow's team, who I'm on the side of, and I believe, right? And he starts talking about the force in Newton's gravity, F equals ma, right? He's got the whole shebango based on Newton and the laws of Newton. The problem that I saw in his evidence that he gave was there wasn't any measurements. It's the same old story we deal with here. He keeps referring to his calculations that he's made. He throws up on a whiteboard a load of seemingly complicated maths to a lawyer.
If you do the calculations with the correct equations and only his mass, you get over 4,000 newtons.
But
when
he just
lands.
throws up some maths that the majority of people probably didn't follow along with, and then he declares who's at fault. He's the witness, he's the defendant's witness. In other words, he's on Paltrow's side. Right, so you can imagine what his conclusions are. But those aside, which I even agreed with, the conclusions alone, but the basis for the conclusions were utilising aspects of Newton that I know are wrong. I've just read out Feynman's quote. And, moreover, my point was to say there's no measurements taking place here, right? He's conjured everything he's given you out of thin air. It's calculations only. No one even saw the damn thing. Did he measure how much newtons of force were on the guy's bloody ribs when Paltrow fell on him? No. He's got no measurements, just calculations. So he's got the conjurings of the words, in this case the language of maths, to create forces and how much would break ribs. You know, this is conjured out of thin air. Show me a measurement. There isn't one. Further to that, the laws of Newton are wrong. They're not right. That was my perspective in the chat. I'm a Paltrow fan and I got timed out for it. Told to stop spamming and things of that nature. When I'm pointing out, this is on a channel called Legal Bytes. So I actually like the channel host, and I said to her in the chat while this was going on, you know, because there's a bit of a kerfuffle about this, because I'm essentially disagreeing with the evidence being presented from the side that everybody else is on, so including me. So when someone challenges the basis of the evidence being presented, which is me, saying I don't agree with this because he hasn't got any measurements, that's my main overriding point. And then when people start talking about how valid newtons are in his calculations, I'm like, oh, Newton's not even right. And then I start getting asked for citations. And I didn't have them at a pinch, hence me asking QE for that Feynman quote, to be honest. Not because it tied into today's show, because I was furious and I couldn't find it at a pinch. Anyway, the point is that for that, I got kicked out of the chat. Not banned, maybe I was, I don't know. But I was furious. I was like, goodbye. I'm unsubscribing in my fury, stomping off in a huff. But actually, check her out. She's very good at Legal Bytes herself. This is one of her overzealous mods in this regard. But yeah, it doesn't mean I disagree with the overall premise that's being put forth by the defendant, Gwyneth Paltrow. It doesn't mean I don't believe her story. I do. It just means that the evidence I saw is being presented in a way that supported her story, and that's what you pay for with good lawyers, right? Something that's going to razzle-dazzle the jury. And most of the jury are going to be like your layman, and they're not going to follow along with Newtons and the forces that have been quote-unquote calculated. They're not going to see the magic trick. Now, we deal daily with the magic trick of calculations over measurements. So when I saw it, I'm like, oh, here we go. A bit of a swindle from a ski scientist. And you're like, no, I can trump that. I've got Feynman. If you want to argue with me about whether or not the Newton values are correct, notwithstanding the fact that certain aspects of it do work in the medium of air, doesn't change the fact that ultimately the laws of motion of Newton were not right, end quote, Feynman. That's the point. But not my overarching point when it comes to the swindle of calculations over measurements. And that got me kicked out anyway of the chat, or at least for 5 minutes. So I just thought I'd drop it in, because this magic trick, like we were describing in the pre-show, is cross genre. I don't know what the word I'm looking for in that regard, but that's the best I can come up with. It's cross subject matter. Doesn't matter if you're looking at the swindle of maths versus science, or calculations in maths versus measurements in maths. There's always some hustle going on, you know, and when you know it, you spot it immediately and call it out, even if the person that's using the hustle is on your side. It's like me versus Bob Nodell. I'm on his side. But when I see a swindle, I'm going to call it out. Well, that gets you very much objected to. And in this case, timed out on Legal Bytes live stream chat. Because people don't like it. Oh, right, you agree with me, but you don't like the way I'm trying to fight my case. Basically, yeah. Yeah, I'll call it out as wrong because it's wrong even if your overall premise is right. Why use a fallacious argument if you're right anyway? Just be right and use good evidence. Don't swindle people with calculations for forces that you've not measured. That's all I was trying to get across when I got timed out. And there's me venting my frustration about legal bytes. Subscribe today, by the way, actually. Like I say, I unsubscribed out of frustration. I'll probably subscribe back, as she's very reasonable and even-handed as a host and as a chat mod. So, shout out to you. Anyway, right, that's enough of my rant about Newtons and forces conjured by ski scientists.
I was just going to say that it sounds like they took the hint right out of Neil Smoking the Grass Tyson's book. Because he says things like, oh, because we were able to calculate how much fuel would be necessary to make it to the moon, therefore we know we went to the moon. I mean, that checks out. Sure.